Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Taking Care of Business on WCWP 88.1 FM. You may be listening to us on a number of different formats. It could be iTunes. It could be on tcbradio.mypodcast.com. But wherever you're listening to us, thank you for listening. We have an action-packed, and I mean action-packed, gunslinging and butt-kickery. And most importantly, today's theme is heroism. And we have with us Colonel Gary Dolan, who wrote an incredible book about his military experience called Of Their Own Accord. So welcome to the show. And I have special co-hosts. So I have a team of lawyers. Not only this guy a brave man, but he's also an attorney too. So the only way to take on a airborne ranger who's a lawyer is to have three lawyers on the other side to question him and interrogate and work him over. So I have with me, to my right, Paul Solomon, my brother.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the emails.
All right. And, of course, Paul is a real estate attorney out in Lawrence, Long Island. And we have Steve Hamill, who's, a man of many, many talents. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
And why don't you give a plug to yourself, where you're working these days, and how can people find you?
I see. You can always find me in different locations. Currently, I'm a assistant professor of business law at Queensborough Community College, and also a practicing real estate attorney and title guy.
There you go.
Title insurance.
Title insurance.
Yeah. You can give me McGregor Abstract, S. Hamill at McGregorAbstract.com.
There you go. And, of course, an airborne ranger, so I'd like to salute you first and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for inviting me here, and I really appreciate not only the warm welcome, but the patriotic fervor and spirit that you've shown me. I mean, that's more than a welcome, and I really appreciate it.
Well, we come just to tell our audience, they don't see what happens in pre-production, nor do they hear it, but, we come from a long line of military service. Our father was in the United States Army. I believe it was 48 to 51. We had an uncle who was in the Air Force as a navigator. We had an Uncle Abraham Levenstein, who fought with the United States Marine Corps in World War II in the 2nd Division. There's actually a picture of him leading a charge in the Marine Corps 2nd Division, documentary book, which is kind of wild. He was with the Windtalkers. The Windtalkers or the Windwalkers? The guys with the Wind... Talkers. Yeah, because he was the guy who was with the Navajos, because they used the Navajos to communicate, because they were afraid that the Japanese would be able to break some of the traditional, communications, but by using a foreign language. In fact, he told us he would hang out with the chief and stuff like that. It's kind of cool.
I don't think they ever broke the language.
No, they never did.
Broke the code.
No, they never did.
No, it drove them absolutely crazy.
Yes. So Abraham Levenstein, United States Marine. In fact, I was on the U.S. Iwo Jima in May of 2010. Courtesy of my friend, Captain Dr. Harry Levenstein, who is with the United States Navy Medical Group. And I got press access and did a whole show, and there's an archive on there somewhere. So I'm trying to think. We had an uncle who's in the Battle of the Bulge, Louis Shinazi, fought he was in the National Guard, I think, when World War II started. He was the first one in. He was literally the last one out. He served, I think, every day of World War II and served bravely and really suffered for it. He really, lost a lot of time, and I think he had some, post-war stress from it. He had an incredible collection of German memorabilia. I think he almost got killed getting some of it.
Yeah. Well, we share much in common, because my dad too was what they call a lifer. My dad actually had his picture on the front page of the New York Times because he joined the Army right out of high school. And he got a battlefield commission before his 18th birthday. Too young to even go to OCS.
Wow, that's unbelievable. Where did he grow up? Where did your dad grow up?
He grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
And then he joined the Army. Then he served not only in World War II, but also Korea, the full time in Korea, and then 2 tours in Vietnam. And I didn't even tell him that I went to West Point until I was already there. So it was a big surprise to him that I was following in his footsteps.
Now, you served in Vietnam.
I served in Vietnam.
And your dad served in Vietnam.
Yeah, we weren't there at the same time.
Because our uncle told us, Uncle Abe told us that he missed his father by like a portion of a day during World War II, because his father was in the military also. the same time he was in there.
When my dad retired, he retired to Monterey, California, and I was out there visiting another attorney, the attorney for a town next door, and in walks Clint Eastwood, who happens to be the mayor.
Mayor of Carmel by
the sea.
I'll tell you a great story. I was in Carmel a number of years ago. I went on a little trip to California and Hawaii, and there was these great T-shirts. It was a very rich blue T-shirt and a picture of Clint Eastwood, sort of in one of those Dirty Harry, poses from the movie. It said, Clint Eastwood, mayor of Carmel, and there's a picture of him holding a Magnum 44, and the motto was, I said curb your dog.
Well, my dad retired out there to Monterey, and a year later he was the mayor.
Oh, wow.
So he passed away, but he was an amazing man. Sometimes I think the only thing I inherited from him was a heavy beard, but I did also inherit the love of our country. And it really, even though he was in World War II, one of the reasons that I decided to write my book was that I wanted the word to get out about the heroics of the men with whom I served, the Rangers, the Airborne Rangers.
So let's talk about your bio. So here you are, and you join West Point, and you don't tell anybody, I guess, until you're there. So how did you actually leak the news? There was no internet at the time.
No,
there was no WikiLeaks.
well, when you first join West Point, let me tell you, they call it Beast Barracks. Okay, I mean, and they put you through hell. What they do is they shave all of your hair, and they reduce you to nothing, so that they can build you up into the leader that they want to develop. And what I did is, after I was there, I wrote a letter and I signed it, New Cadet Gary Dolan, to my dad, who was in Vietnam at the time.
And what was his reaction?
Well, I can only guess. I know he was proud, although he never told me so. He was a difficult man to live with. He was an amazing person. He had a photographic memory, so he was never wrong. If you saw the movie The Great Santini, that
yes.
could easily, instead of been about a Marine, it could have been about my dad.
Wow.
So I'm sure he was very proud.
When he was in the service, where did he fight in World War II?
He told me stories about getting off the boat in Scotland and seeing all these guys in skirts, and then he was in the invasion and
D-Day?
and yeah, he was there.
Which beach did he hit?
Well, see, the thing is, my dad, like most people, no matter what war they're in, they don't talk about it.
Yeah, that's always. Everybody's very tight-lipped about the stuff. We knew a guy that fought in Afghanistan for the Russians. All right, he was a tank commander, and we tried to get him to talk about it, and he wouldn't tell us anything. He fought in Afghanistan in the 80s.
Yeah. I had a guy in my unit in Vietnam who escaped from the communists. There were two of them at 18 years old that escaped in Bulgaria. They were sharing a rebreather apparatus to get out to an Italian trawler. And they were picked up on radar, and a boat was sent out, and it machine gunned his friend to death, so they didn't realize there was a second swimmer, and he escaped. And then he joined my unit, joined the Rangers, because he wanted to fight against communism.
All right, what was that guy's name?
His name was Lazar Lazarov.
Now, you have a website with all these really cool pictures. It's oftheirownaccord.com?
Oftheirownaccord.com.
Now, why'd you get that name? Where'd the name come from? Because I know there's a story behind that.
Well, yes, there is, and it's a main theme of my book, because all these men served of their own accord, but more importantly, the Rangers' motto in Latin is sua sponte. And guess what sua sponte translates to?
Well, we happen to know because that's a very common legal term, but it means of its own motion or
of their own accord.
Yeah.
It's the motto of the Rangers is of their own accord.
Now, which Ranger unit were you in?
Okay, I was with C Company 75th. It was C Company Ranger 75th Infantry Airborne. So they called us Charlie Rangers.
Wow. And where were you guys based out of?
Well, we were based out of Nha Trang and then An Khê in Vietnam. We're in the Central Highlands. However, my unit would be what they call OPCON, under operational control of many different units throughout all of Vietnam. Matter of fact, we were in places like Laos and Cambodia when they said we weren't there.
So when you used your Garmin or your TomTom to find out where you were? Was it like blanked out?
Well, the team. We here's the way we operated. We had 6 men. Now think of yourself as one of only 6 men that you'd be dropped by helicopter behind the enemy lines in enemy territory. First thing you do is you go and hide. Make sure nobody saw you. Then when you've been hiding for an hour or two and nobody has realized that you're there, then you go through the jungle, never on a trail because you're only 6 men. You can't fight a war with only 6 men, no matter how well equipped you are. And then you set up an ambush. Now, see, the enemy always expected the American forces to operate in huge division-size, battalion-size operations.
I would have figured that, yeah.
And the enemy wanted to pick their place and location. So they would infiltrate through Cambodia and through different places, and they would pick, say, a base that had 200 Americans, and they would surround it by a couple thousand men, and if they could kill off 200, even if it cost them 1,000, think of the press that they would get back home. Because remember, the Americans weren't very favorably disposed to what we were doing. So they would pick the time and place. But when we had 6 men that would cause an ambush, they thought we were the lead element of a huge American force. So what would they do? They were told that if they hit an American force not at their time and choosing and their place, they had to go back to Cambodia and disperse. So they hated us Rangers because we would cause a year's worth of planning to go up in smoke because they would cause all their men to go back and disperse. Meanwhile, we'd kill a bunch of them. And they'd never realize it was only 6 men.
So you got to tell me a little bit about what was the whole thing going on in Cambodia and Laos? Because, the American government always said we were not there, and yet we were operating out of there. So for the people out there who'd understand the history of all of that, could you explain what was going on? Were we based out of Cambodia? Were we trying to infiltrate through Cambodia, through Vietnam?
No, it was none of that. What we were trying to do is we were trying to disrupt their channels of communication, their channels of resupply, their channels of bringing troops into Vietnam and then into South Vietnam from North Vietnam and from the neighboring countries like Laos and Cambodia. And because once they crossed over the border, we weren't supposed to cross the border. And this is just a line in the jungle. So they had safe havens. They would have base camps. They would have resupply just over the border that they could freely then come across at their choosing and then wreak havoc upon the South Vietnamese government that we were supporting.
How did you know when you were in Laos versus Vietnam, or you didn't know?
Well, we had a pretty good idea. One of the things that you had to keep in mind, especially if you were ever going to call in artillery or you're going to call in any kind of support, is you needed to know where you were. That map reading, and we didn't have the items that you mentioned.
TomTom, Garmin, Magellan.
We didn't have any satellites to tell us where we were. And so one of my team leaders used to make fun because what the teams would do is I'd be flying in a fixed wing 2-seater aircraft, a Cessna. It was called an 01 Bird Dog. And I was flying what was called command and control, CNC. And a team would be out in the jungle. We put them into a space that they had seen before. They would go on what we called a VR, a visual reconnaissance. We do a flyover of the area that they were going to be operating in. And they would have maps, and they would get a visual reconnaissance to see the area in which they were hopefully going to be operating. And then it was my job to vector in the aircraft low, against the trees. Now think about this. You got a helicopter flying at 50 kilometers an hour at treetop level. You think that pilot can see where he's going? Not. He'll fly right over the landing zone. But I would be in a fixed wing aircraft, and I'd tell him how far it was and vector him into the right distance to get into the right zone.
So were you a precursor to the AWACS?
Yeah, exactly.
In a way?
Exactly.
Yeah,
in a way.
Oh, by the way, an AWAC is an advanced warning air control system, and those are the planes that have the big round things that spin around that you see and pretty much military footage of the current vintage. Yeah. There was no AWACS way back when.
And what we would do is we would have the helicopter land in 5 or 6 different LZs, landing zones, and at one of them, at the pre-described location, the team of 6 men would jump out. Now, sometimes they wouldn't even let the helicopter touch ground. They jumped from 6 feet up, sometimes into elephant grass that they thought was only a foot or two high, and it was like 6 feet high. So they'd be jumping from 12 feet. Now, remember, they had a 60-pound rucksack on their back, and plus ammunition and everything else. So that could even be dangerous. But then the 6 men would be infiltrated into the enemy territory.
Now, what did they? Okay, you got to tell me a bit about, because it's so funny. I know all these people who watch like Survivor, and I say, no, that's not Survivor. What these guys did. When they throw you off of a helicopter with like a knife and a frying pan and a machine gun, and they say, "We'll see you in a few days." That's Survivor. Now, what did they do to survive?
Okay,
did they eat off the land and all that?
Also, Gary, if you don't mind, if you could talk
about
how you repelled upside down, which I thought was an amazing thing.
I'll have to get that later. But that's another story.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, but maybe just going back to the Laos and Cambodia aspect of it, is this is 40 years ago. Do you think that somehow your perception of what happened 40 years ago could somehow influence or give us a insight as to what's happening currently? Pakistan's been in the news lately. I mean, it seems that they have a sanctuary to go to where these guys in Vietnam had a sanctuary to go to also.
Good questions. Very good questions, Steve. I think parallels can be drawn on every war in the sense that you're talking about places, and I'm talking more about people, but the experiences of the soldiers, the ones on the ground, they're identical. I don't care whether it was the war between the states, whether it was a war against Great Britain for our freedom, or whether it was World War II, World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam, the current war against terror. The experiences of the soldiers are the same. But let me get back to the description about the 6 men that we just dropped off in the jungle, and then I'll get back to your question.
You're listening to Taking Care of Business with Richard Solomon, Paul Solomon, and special guest co-host Steve Hamill. We're here with Gary Dolan, Airborne Ranger, author of Their Own Accord, which is also oftheirownaccord.com. This is WCWP 88.1 FM. And thank you for listening. And we continue with Gary Dolan.
Okay, we got these 6 men all by themselves. First thing they do is they go and hide. And then they scout the area. During the visual reconnaissance, if they had spotted a trail, which normally you don't see through the jungle because it's triple canopy, it can be unbelievably hot. And when I say hot, I mean Vietnam hot is hotter than anybody here has ever experienced. But down in the jungle, it's pitch black. It's dark because the sunlight doesn't even penetrate that triple canopy. And they'll come across...
And that's during the daylight.
And that's during the daylight.
Wow.
And they'll come across paths that they didn't see from the air. And some of them they called high-speed highway. They could tell it was beaten down because of the tracks of the enemy soldiers. So they would set up an ambush. Now, think of yourself in this tepid heat. Now, the jungle is alive. I mean, it's alive. You've got every kind of crawling, flying, insect, snakes. There were tigers. We've even had situations where our fellow rangers were out on at night. Somebody was carried away by a big cat, and they found his dead body later. That's horrible. You've got all this stuff going on. You're sitting there in an ambush for hours. You're sweating. You can't make a single noise. You can't eat. You can't do anything, waiting for the enemy. Hardest part is just waiting. And then maybe nothing happens. Then that night you got to crawl, and what you do is, now it's really dark, okay? You want to crawl under a briar patch. You want to crawl where nobody is going to go. With only 6 men, you don't want them to happen to come across you because you can't really defend yourself.
Now, would the 6 men be very tightly concentrated, or would they be spread out?
Oh, no. At night, when they're going to go into their sleeping, they put the radio in the middle. All the heads are against the radio so they can take turns during their watch because somebody stays awake all the time, and they sleep head to head to head, all underneath the densest bush that they can find so nobody can sneak up on them.
Okay. And I guess listening is very key to hear like the crunching noises or the bushes or something.
Oh, yeah. And somebody who's a newbie, somebody who's his first time out, every single noise keeps him awake all night.
And could you also talk about the defensive perimeter that you set up with the...
good question. One thing they do is they put out claymores. Now, these Claymores have
Claymore mines, yes.
Yeah, they Claymore mines that they can hand detonate, and they put them all around, so the backblast doesn't hurt them, so that if they need to, they can explode it. Let me tell you a funny story one time. We had a team that was being put out, and we told them, hey, the enemy has tanks, small Russian-made tanks in this sector. They can bring over from Cambodia. So you got to take anti-tank weapons with you, a light anti-tank weapon. During the night, this team was freaking out over the radio because we had an X-ray. Now, what's X-ray? At the tallest mountain, we put a heavy team that nobody can get to because you can only reach them by helicopter so that they can communicate with these guys down in the valley because they can't communicate back to base, and I'm not flying in my O-1 aircraft, so they have no communication other than this, what we call an X-ray site. It's a radio relay site. The team was going crazy because they heard what they believed to be the tank, and it was coming straight at them. And it kept coming, making god-awful noises, and it had to be a tank. Well, they decided to fire their law. They heard the most god-awful shriek they'd ever heard. And the next morning, what'd they find? Not a tank, but an elephant.
Wow. Now, speaking of animals, we talked a little bit about pre-production. Some of your colleagues had animals, pets, or whatever. Could you talk about that a little bit? It's kind of the human element of all this.
These guys are 18 years old. I mean, they're big, bad airborne rangers, but they're still 18-year-old kids. And every team, now team is the 6 men. Sometimes we even had some scouts with us who were repatriated ex-North Vietnamese who were really good because they used to be the enemy. They could help out the team. And if the team leader trusted them, then they would go out with them. But these teams back in the barracks, all right, when they're not out in the field, they had the run of their platoon hooch, and usually a big tent. And one of my teams had a monkey as a pet. Another team had a boa constrictor as a pet. Another one had a chuhoi, they called their dog, and another one had a cat. And they didn't necessarily get along too well. But I got to tell you a story about this one particular monkey. See, Team 2-2 had been out in the field, and Laz was with Team 2-3, and he was getting ready to go to the field. Now, when these guys come back, now think about it. If you're out there in the field, do you sleep much? You sleep with one eye open, okay? And you only got 5 other guys. You don't sleep too well. So when these guys come in, sometimes they don't even take the camouflage paint off their faces. They collapse on their bunks. And as an officer, I just didn't go in their bunk. I gave them the respect that that's their home. They can keep it as dirty and as filthy and as... But they also...
You'd like our office.
Well, so Laz said he had to go up. They were had all their rucksacks ready to go. The new team was going out in the field to replace a team that come back in at a different location. And Laz goes in, and I hear him yelling, "Hey, monkey, no, don't do, monkey used to, oh." And then I hear a weapon going off. Bam, bam. And this poor kid who happened to be from Brooklyn, okay, and we called him the Cuban, and everybody had a nickname. And he starts screaming at Laz, "Why did you kill my monkey?" Well, there was a box of grenades that was by the bunk, a whole box full of grenades, and the monkey was pulling the pin.
Oh, that could have been ugly. So you also telling me a little story in pre-production about how the monkey, the hand just came out. You got to tell me about that, because that's just, the listeners will just love that one.
All right. I check in. You got to understand, when I first got into country, I was supposed to go to a unit called the 173rd, which was an airborne unit. I had orders to go to the 173rd. Now, I graduated from West Point. I go through my indoctrination, and I meet this major who looks really cool. He's wearing camouflage fatigues. I mean, that's not the regular solid green fatigue. He looked strack. And he said, you want to get to my unit? I could use a platoon leader, but you got to hitchhike and get your own way there. And there's a place called On K. Now, think about it. You come from the States, you go to this foreign country that I'd never even heard of before. Okay, now we're fighting a war there. And they tell me, go to On K and I'll cover for you. Well, I went AWOL. What's AWOL? I went,
Absent without official leave.
yeah. I said, what are they going to do to me? Send me to Vietnam? I'm already there. And it'd be more of embarrassment. A West Point graduate gets lost in Vietnam. So I hitchhiked. I caught flights going, and I said, I want to get this place on K. I have no idea where it is. I don't know, never heard of it before.
You just use your iPhone.
And he told me if I got there within 3 days, he would cover for me the paperwork. Well, I made it there in 2 days. I hitchhiked there. Part of the way there, I was on a convoy that got hit by the North Vietnamese. And here, consider this. I'm brand new in country. I don't even have a weapon. I'm absent without leave, and I go into my unit. I'm riding in the back of a truck, and now I'm under fire. Okay? But anyway, I made it to this place. And they tell me, okay, we're going to take care of you. Of course, the first sergeant wanted to see all my paperwork, and I said, I have none. He just shakes his head and he says, go down and get some chow. So I walk into this tent where the mess hall is, and I sit down, and there's one of the Charlie Rangers sitting eating a meal across from me. And I said, wait a minute, something doesn't look right. All of a sudden, I'm watching him. Out of his shirt comes this little hand, grabs some potatoes and goes back in his shirt. And I said, whoa. And I said to the guy next to me, did you see that? And he says, oh, don't worry. That's Bo, the monkey, with the monkey man.
I hate to find out what happened to the potatoes after they were finished. But that's another story.
but there's a picture of the monkey man with Bo on my website. But he actually
of theirownaccord.com.
He actually snuck the monkey back to the States. He went stateside with him inside his shirt.
Lucille Ball did that with the cheese. Remember that? Wait, how did he say the kid was just a hairy little baby? And
I have no clue.
I tell you, my son really needs to shave, even though he's 4.
Yeah, but let me just say this. One of the reasons that I wrote the book Of Their Own Accord is that we weren't treated too well when we came back from Vietnam,
which in Yiddish is a shanda. It means a shame, a terrible shame, because here you are, you sacrifice your life, your time, your freedom, and you're treated with, at best, ignorance and at worst, disdain.
Yeah, there's a story that I'm not going to go into because I encourage you to get the book and read it, and you'll understand from our point of view as to how we felt about it. But there's a story about a young soldier who believed in peace and would have been out with the protesters, who ended up getting hospitalized, by other protesters who didn't realize how he felt simply because he was in uniform. Wow. It was terrible, but the whole story's in the book. But I decided I wanted to write a book that was factual, it was real, it was true from my own perspective, but it showed the heroics of what our guys did. And let me mention here, too, we Vietnam veterans believe that because of us, the current soldiers who are returning from the war are treated with tremendous respect because the country has this complex guilt conscience for the way they treated us. And we've been at the forefront to say you can be against the war, but don't be against the warrior. We were doing our duty as best we could, and sometimes that was difficult. I mean, can you imagine fighting a war with the following, which is now happening in some of the areas of the war against terror? No fire zone. Well, what do I mean by that?
I actually know what that means, but go ahead.
I explained it to my team leaders that we were now going into an area that was a no-fire zone. Now, what are team leaders? They're the senior NCOs that are in charge of the team of 6 men.
NCO is not commissioned officer for those.
The sergeants. They're ones who really run the Army, not us officers. They just make us look good. And I said to them about the no-fire zone, that you're not allowed to fire upon the enemy. Even if you see them with weapons, even if you see them setting up the mortars, you can't fire until fired upon. So he says, oh, I get it, sir. We're supposed to whistle at them, so then when they shoot us, then we can kill them. I mean, it's crazy. How are you supposed to win a war that way? I mean, it's one thing about not being allowed to cross a border that doesn't exist on the ground. It's just a line on a map. But our guys are now being told they can't fire unless fired upon. I mean,
if it isn't that a matter of opinion, I mean, it's sort of like the old situation you hear about as a lawyer where, you're in a gunfight and you kill a guy, and then, you shoot 2 rounds in the air, and they say, well, did you fire a warning shot? You go, absolutely. It's just the sequence was off.
Well,
you fired the warning shots at the end.
Yeah, precisely. I told my guys if they were going to bring back any weapons, because, a lot of times they had captured weapons, just make sure they were fired before they were brought in.
Yeah.
And they understood exactly what I meant. But our unit was absolutely incredible.
Right. You are listening. This show is flying. I mean, that was the fastest half hour. We have another half hour to go. In case you're joining us midstream, you are listening to Taking Care of Business at WCWP 88.1 FM, broadcasting to you from the Abrams Communication on LIU's CW Post campus. We are here with Paul Solomon, my co-host. I'm Richard Solomon, of course, and with Steve Hamill. The three of us are attorneys, and we're interviewing a fellow attorney who is a combat veteran with distinguished service, and his book is called Of Their Own Accord. Gary Dolan, and his book is and the website are oftheirownaccord.com. He's got some really cool content, and I would be very proud, I'm sure Paul would be too, to have our show as part of his website. We'll see what we can do about getting that up there, because it's just I could probably do this thing all day if we had the time. But go ahead. So you're telling a great story.
Okay.
You're talking about all the cool people in your unit, and what you were going to say is how many people from the Ranger Hall of Fame came from your unit.
Oh, yeah. See,
I'm good.
You're really good.
That was like my Karnak move of the day. How was that for a prediction? If only I could do that with the stock market.
Yeah. Well.
Now, remember, we were just a company-sized unit, okay? But
how many people in the company?
Okay, we had 237, which made us the largest Ranger company in Vietnam, because we worked directly for what was called First Field Force. We were in the Central Highlands. You probably maybe you saw the movie about We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
Yes.
That was the Central Highlands. That's where we operated. And we operated throughout. We were all over Vietnam. I mean, they would put us under operational control. We'd have units spread out all over the place, and the general loved us. And when he created us, he made it a point that the Major Malone, who was the one who started our unit, that he would get all volunteers who are all airborne qualified, and almost all of our cadre, the officers and the sergeants and non-commissioned officers, were all Ranger School qualified. Not all of them were, but the great majority of them. So it was an all-volunteer type of unit, which meant they were of their own accord to join our unit. And to give you an indication of how phenomenal our guys were, I just returned a few weeks ago from Fort Benning, because I had nominated and wrote up the package to submit one of my 18-year-olds from Vietnam, a fellow by the name of Gary O'Neill, for the Ranger Hall of Fame. He and a platoon sergeant, who really helped me when I was a young lieutenant from Vietnam in my unit, were both inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame. That's amazing, because most of the ones in there are living or dead legends. They're recipients of the highest medal, the Medal of Honor. Most of them are deceased. This individual, and if I can
please tell us,
tell you a little bit about him.
Don't hold it back. This is the forum. This is the one place on the radio where you could actually get more than a soundbite.
Okay, Gary O'Neill was an American Indian, and I remember one day, because he had been out in the field, and his team came back, and I'm looking for him because I want to take him as my guard, because I had pay duty and I had to visit guys who were recruiting. I had to visit some of our guys who were in LBJ. Now, what was LBJ? It stands for Long Binh Jail. We had guys in the hospital in Cameron Bay. I had to visit them. Everybody had to get paid, and I was carrying money, so I had to take a guard. And I wanted to take Gary O'Neill. Couldn't find him. He came out of the field, and where everybody else went to sleep, he heard that there was short a man for 3rd Platoon. Not even my own platoon, a different platoon. And he went back to the field with them. He loved being in the field. And being an Indian, he was amazing in the field. So he was an amazing troop. He gave me my share of headaches as being his platoon leader, especially when the guys were in the rear. They really caused some havoc. But when they're in the field, amazing. He came back from Vietnam, and he was part of the Golden Knights, the parachute team. He was one of the originals. Then because he was into jiu-jitsu and other things, he worked with a person who had been captured, Major Rowe, who wrote some books and was an amazing individual, and worked with him to develop an escape and evasion course. Gary O'Neill was that. Well, then Gary O'Neill was tagged to be not the first Delta, which the Delta Force is the elite of the elite, to work for the President of the United States on really top-secret missions. He became the instructor for the Delta. Give you an idea of what kind of person he was.
Wow, not shabby.
Then the CIA asked for some special operations soldiers and Delta-type troops to go down to South America to fight the drug lords. He spent 15 years in South America, married a woman down there and had 2 babies. One of the special operations soldiers was killed on an ambush, and Gary O'Neill heard that he was killed. He went back for the body, and Gary O'Neill was captured. He was strung up by the drug lords, and his wife and 2 babies were killed in front of him. Oh. The villagers convinced the drug lords he was dead and dumped him with the dead bodies and then nursed him back to health. When he came back, he went into additional training for the escape and evasion course at Fort Bragg, and he retired out to an Indian reservation out west. He was having some problems, and I was talking with him, and I convinced him to come back because he was needed, and his experience was needed, and he was brought back at the pay grade of a full colonel to continue teaching the special forces, and he's been teaching the SEALs, and he started his own course now that he's retired again, and just last week he was teaching a SEAL course. That's the kind of man that I had inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame.
Wow. And that's an honor to be the person giving the induction.
Oh, I was thrilled. I mean, he truly deserved it. And my unit of only one company has now 9 representatives in the Ranger Hall of Fame, and no other unit has more than 4, and much larger units, battalion size. So we had an amazing unit.
What do you attribute that to? It
takes a special kind of person to volunteer to do the kind of missions we had, and I think the best of the best encouraged the other best to join. So word got around about how good we were from the time that we were formed up by all volunteers. And people were vying for an opportunity, just like I did, to go AWOL to get to this particular unit. I wanted to serve with the best. I didn't want to be in harm's way with snipers and booby traps. I wanted to be the kind of person that brought the action to the enemy. When they deactivated my unit in Vietnam, and then they reactivated the colors at Fort Benning, and the colors means the flag and the scroll, they selected person by the name of Bob Howard. Now, who was Bob Howard? He was the highest decorated soldier in Vietnam. He had more medals than Audie Murphy from World War II. He was put in for the Medal of Honor 3 separate times by 3 separate entities, even though you're not allowed to get a cluster. You can only get it one time. But why did they do that? Because General Abrams decided he wanted to create the most elite fighting force in the world and call them Rangers. And he created the 75th Ranger Regiment, and they used the colors from my company, Charlie Rangers, to create the 1st Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment. And so now when those that I dearly refer to as baby Rangers, believe me, I don't even think I could merit walking in their shoes. So when I say baby Rangers, I say it with utmost respect. When they look back in the legacy and they see Bob Howard and they see what our unit did, my unit was responsible for more B-52 strikes than any other unit in the history of Nam. We had the highest kill ratio of any unit in Vietnam. General Abrams saw the after-action reports and spoke to General Giap, who was the head of the North Vietnamese, and he said, we caused them more problems than any other unit because all his plans and details and infiltrating would be disrupted by a 6-man team and cause them to have to go back to where they were and start over again. He hated it. So General Abrams decided he wanted to create the most elite of all the Ranger forces, to have the utmost fighter who could fight further, faster, and harder than any other soldier in the world. And he chose the 75th Ranger Regiment, and he used the colors of my company to create the 1st Battalion.
How did that shape you as a lawyer and as a business guy today?
After not speaking the words Vietnam in my house for 30 years and being ashamed of hiding that fact, and now to have the respect of the current Rangers looking upon me as an old fart that led the way, because that's what Rangers say. Rangers lead the way. And they treat me with respect. I feel very good. And because of what they're doing, they've brought great credit upon us. And us old fogs who fought in Vietnam and were not appreciated at the time, that appreciation is turning around. And we're heaping praise upon our current soldiers because of it.
Our uncle, whenever he goes to the Intrepid, he always wears his old, Marine Corps stuff. And when they see that he was from, Guadalcanal, Saipan, all these other places, current Marines salute him and go, a real Marine. And it almost chokes him up. And it's quite touching to see.
Absolutely. I was there in 2001. It was, at the time my book was about ready to come out. And we wore a black beret in Vietnam. And I don't know whether it was authorized or not. It probably wasn't. But the Rangers had the black beret as its symbol. And at the time, the head of the Army decided that he wanted to upgrade the entire Army esprit de corps, and he stated that every soldier would have to wear a black beret. So they took away my pride. But
they diluted it. Yeah.
Well, I was there, and I witnessed pass and review by the current Ranger Regiment, and this was it was amazing. I said, wow, this is the way my tax dollars should be spent. These guys are amazing, and what they currently do in their regimen of exercises and what they go through in just preparing for war, they are truly the best of the best, and they're still all volunteers. That is carried forward to this day. They have to volunteer. And they put on the tan beret, and now the significance of the tan beret is exactly what the black beret meant in the past. So it's nothing more than an indicia. It's an emblem. It's a symbol. But the real strength comes from within. And to give you an idea of how coveted a position is in the Ranger Regiment, they had an opening just a few months ago, and they had 6,000 applicants worldwide applying for one open position in the Ranger Regiment.
Wow, is that instructor-wise?
No, that's to be a soldier in that regiment.
Oh, wow.
Your unit served with such valor and distinction, but it wasn't simply by accident. I mean, I had the great opportunity to read your book, but I think you're minimizing a little bit about the amount of effort that had to go forward before you went out into the field. The training, the discipline, the preparation physically, and and the way you prepare yourself mentally, unlike, I believe, a lot of the other aspects of the service, which built this cohesiveness and protected the other soldiers.
I appreciate your remarks, Steve. It shows considerable insight, because there was no what they call TO&E, Table of Organization and Equipment. When they started the Ranger unit in Vietnam, there was no handbook, there was no guidance, there was no manual. We created it, and because of that, the team leaders, especially if they got a new person in, can you imagine being one of 6 men put behind enemy lines, in the enemy territory? If you're going to be with 5 other guys, you want those guys that you can trust with. Let me give you an example. We had 2 guys that were to join our unit. One came across as hard-nosed, capable, anxious for the fight, and he wanted to prove himself as a Ranger. The other guy walked in wearing love beads. As a team leader, which one do you think you want? Well, they didn't want the one with love beads. Turned out the guy with the love beads, he loved his country. He didn't believe in the war, but he was there. He'd been drafted, and he was ready to do his job, and he volunteered because he wanted to go with the best unit, and he got to Charlie Rangers. The guy that came in hard-nosed, the team was ready to go to the field, and they were going to be doing some precursor training as to how to cross a path, how to move through the jungle without creating noise, how you're going to sleep, what the hand signs meant, if they had to communicate with just hand movement. And they couldn't find this guy. They found him smoking pot. Now, I have to tell you, a lot of the stories that come out about Vietnam are about drugs. I didn't have a drug problem. My team leaders, matter of fact, all the guys in the team, they didn't want to go to the field with anybody who was high on dope because their lives depended upon it. When this news, let's call him John Smith. When the team came to me and said that John Smith was sick and couldn't go to the field and they had to take somebody else, I said, what do you mean he's sick? I said, bring him to me. What are you talking about? He's sick. He wasn't sick. The team beat the hell out of him. They did not want to go to the field with somebody who was high on dope. I mean, it was really that simple. They had an unwritten rule that they all followed. They didn't do drugs and they didn't do alcohol for 3 days before they went to the field. They just didn't do it. No alcohol, nothing. Because your lives are intertwined. Guys may have come to us because they wanted to fight for the country. But that wasn't the truth. That's what they thought. They fought for each other. I love the Vietnam Veteran Memorial in Nassau County because what it says on it is all we had was each other.
You are listening to Taking Care of Business with Richard Solomon, Paul Solomon, and special guest co-host Steve Hamill. So thank you for taking your time to be with us. Steve is a real estate attorney and professor. Paul is a real estate attorney, and I'm a small business lawyer and trial attorney, focusing in commercial law. But today we're talking to Gary Dolan, who wrote Of Their Own Accord. The book is just an incredible book. It has an incredible website that goes with it. Go to his website, buy the book. Let me give you a couple of things. Gary R. Norsworthy, Ranger 75th Infantry Airborne, wrote on he gave his quote, I'd follow Dolan into hell and tell the devil to turn up the heat. That's pretty bold. Based upon a true story of courage under fire and of sacrifice to a sometimes unappreciated nation, Of Their Own Accord brings to life the blazing action adventures of the Charlie Rangers and the special art of warfare. The Vietnam War divided our nation on a scale not witnessed since the Civil War. Gary Dolan's, you say novel, but I don't think it's a novel at all. I think it's only just a novel as far as the fake names. It is a tribute to all who serve with discipline, compassion, humor, and courageous self-examination. And I'm just, in awe of what you've done, what you've achieved, and how real and in the moment you are, and how proud you are, and how that exudes out of you, and that's all great stuff,
I have to be the one that says thank you. I mean, thank you for providing this opportunity to talk about my favorite subject.
Well, we're not part of the sellout media, so who don't take on any issue. It's all about what celebrities in jail and will they get out before 30 days and whether they were crying or not. We actually try to bring some level of interesting content that other people don't really talk about in any depth.
It's a shame that most of our listening audience can name like 6 celebrities who can get tanked up, but we can't name 6 Rangers that are in the Ranger Hall of Fame, and we're here to resolve that. Yeah.
Is there a Ranger Alumni Association or something like that?
Oh, there certainly is. When I wrote the book and I found out that I had a unit association, since I had hid from the world the fact that I was a Ranger and served in Vietnam. It wasn't until after I wrote the book that I realized that my unit, Charlie Rangers, had an association. Every one of the Ranger companies has an association. Then they have a 75th Ranger Regiment Association. There's a United States Army Ranger Association. There's a Worldwide Army Rangers. Now, guess what Worldwide Army Ranger, if you just use the initials, what's that spell?
WWAR.
No, WAR, Worldwide Army Rangers.
WW. I went to law school.
He takes the literal meaning.
Yeah.
So I never realized that going to these association meetings would be such a healing experience. Writing the book was very cathartic for me. I mean, it was a healing factor.
Okay, you told us in pre-production about the writing experience, but we didn't get it actually on the air. So I'd love you to tell the story about your being on your honeymoon and then getting out there and then the letters and all the other stuff. So I don't want to take the thunder out of that.
Okay, picture this. I got married I graduated from West Point in '69. Now you can't be married at West Point; they'll throw you out. Okay, so it's like
maybe they know something.
Now the cadet chapel afterwards is like an assembly line. I mean, just one right after the other. But I got married a year afterwards, and what it was is I when I graduated from West Point and I volunteered to go in the infantry. That's what I wanted to do, and the government spent a ton of money, teaching me at West Point. Then they sent me to jungle warfare school in Panama. They sent me to Ranger school. They sent me to airborne school and Pathfinder school, and I graduated the 101st Recondo. So I was prepared in my mind to lead men. And as a cadet, I would hear every day guys that graduated a year before me, 2 years before me, names at lunchtime, at dinner time, being read off as killed in action. And I would read the reports of so many lieutenants like fodder that weren't prepared, that were being killed in Vietnam. And I felt that I was very well trained, and I had an obligation to put my training to use to save lives. So I actually was the very first of my graduating class to get to Vietnam. And the way I did that was when I went to the 82nd, my first assignment. See, there's an unwritten rule that West Pointers are supposed to spend 1 full year outside of school. So when you finish up all your schooling, go to a unit for 1 year before you go to a combat zone. But I made a deal, and I formed what was called the Brigade LRPs for the 82nd. I was a second lieutenant, and it was the first time they had LRPs. That stands for Long Range Patrol. And so I got my taste of rangering, and I put it to use. And I made the colonel promise me that if I met his goals, that he'd send me to Vietnam. So I got to Vietnam, and now I was on orders, and I fell in love with this gorgeous creature, and I knew that at that time, her dad would never have let her join me on R&R unless we were married. So I gave the family 2 months to arrange a wedding. We went on a 40-day honeymoon. We went to Mexico. We went to Thailand. We went to Japan. There were a lot of flights going, space available east, so it wasn't hard to get a flight. And it didn't cost me anything. But after 40 days, I'd saved up all my leave time. I came back and I gave her back to her father and said, "Now who's going to give her back to you for a year and but teach her how to cook?" And and then I turned around the day after I returned from my honeymoon is when I left for Vietnam. My wife wrote to me every single day. We were madly in love, still really on an extended honeymoon, just apart from each other by a few thousand miles. And I wrote to her as often as I could, and I never told her the bad side of war. But then 30 years later, after never mentioning the words Vietnam in my house, my kids never heard a single story, I decided when I heard about the greatest generation, which I thought had turned its back on all subsequent generations, Korea and Vietnam, that I was going to write a book that showed the heroics. And I sat down to write my book, and my wife says, "Oh, wait a minute, I got a surprise for you." I didn't even know she had it. She brought out a box. It was every one of my letters. And I was always in the habit of putting where we were, the date, and the day. And it was like a diary. I started reading the letters. It was like a flashback. I could feel the tepid heat. I could smell the mustiness of that canvas tent, especially when it got wet. And believe the monsoons over there, you've never seen raindrops until you've been in a monsoon. I mean, rivers change their course in front of your eyes just from the downpour. And roads that existed no longer existed. So it was a diary, and I sat down, and I just dumped myself. My brain, I didn't bother editing. I wrote out over 400 pages. I couldn't keep up with my mind. I couldn't write fast enough.
Do you still have the letters?
I still have the letters. A couple of them are even in the book.
I was going to say that maybe these letters need to go into some kind of, I don't know, Ranger Hall of Fame, archive or something. It's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah.
Think about make a movie out of it.
Food for thought. Hey, for Hollywood people listening, this guy's got good stuff for you.
So that's how I was. For example, in the book I mentioned that on December 19th of 1970, I came out of the field, still with grunginess, and took the law school admission test in Saigon. If you look up the records, you'll find that the test was given in Saigon on December 19th. Okay, so everything in the book Well, I shouldn't say everything. My wife claims that there's one story about R&R in Hawaii that was a figment of my wildest imagination. But everything in the book is true from my perspective. Okay.
Like in Austin Powers, lies or lies.
But it really enabled me to write the book as it now is, and I'm very, very proud of it. It gives tribute to the heroics of the men with whom I served in Charlie Rangers in Vietnam, and I'm just absolutely pleased and honored and privileged to be with people such as yourselves who have such a heritage of service to our country, to allow me to speak about my favorite subjects, which is the Charlie Rangers that I served with in Vietnam.
I only had NJROTC, but I was very proud of that. In fact, I went to an Army-Navy store in Washington, D.C., and actually got an NJROTC patch, the little ship and everything like that.
Yeah, the Army didn't want me. I'm asthmatic. The FBI, not even as a JAG officer. My father was just after Korea, had somebody that was in Andersonville, during the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather was a drummer boy in the Civil War. But they just didn't want me because I'm asthmatic, even as a lawyer. Go figure. Wow. But, Gary, I thank you very much for your service. I'm proud to have, made your acquaintance as a friend and as a colleague. You're a great American, and I certainly appreciate being a part of your life. I thank you very much.
And I'm glad you tell the story, because the story needs to be told. It needs to be in libraries. It needs to be told. And, people have such thin skin today, and they talk about how much they suffer and how tragic things are. And I'm like, you don't really know how tragic it is until you're in the jungle being eaten alive by mosquitoes, and people, each side of you are getting killed.
For example, I'd like to add to that, to our college students here at the university, the 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds here, who may complain that they didn't get their course, or their iPod is not working, or whatever tragedy of the day. I want them to think that they could have been 18 years old at a fire base in the middle, and it could have been, the Tet Offensive or whatever, and think how different their life would have been.
That's right.
Oh, everything is relative. There was a time in my life when just a tent was pure heaven and comfort, instead of just being out under some bramble bush in the middle of the jungle. So everything is relative.
It sure is. Now, talk a little bit about the book, the publishing, the website, and your contact information.
Okay, the website is the same name as the title of the book, Of Their Own Accord. Okay, so just go to oftheirownaccord.com. If you click on the book cover, you can even see my bio, because my email address is there, the phone number is there, gdolan@optonline.net. And I'll tell you what, if you mention the fact that you heard this broadcast here, then not only will you get a book, but you'll get a personally autographed copy of the book.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Very nice.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Email.
The email, once again, is gdolan, GDOLAN, @optonline.net. Okay? If, for Father's Day, or if you've got an uncle who served, especially if they served in Vietnam, I got to tell you a real quick story. I had a woman from Minnesota who called me up because her husband read it. He had been a sniper in Vietnam, so she read it, and she said it was a love story, and she tracked me down in my law office just to thank me for writing it. That made me feel awesome.
Wow. You have any more books coming up?
I've considered writing about the history of Echo Lerps and the history of Charlie Rangers, which would be totally nonfiction. Although I wrote this book in novel shape, it really is true from my perspective.
All right, well, a million thanks, and I mean that from my heart. This was the fastest 59 minutes and 55 seconds in radio to date. I want to thank Paul. Thanks for always being there and being a great brother and a great co-host and a great co-lawyer in the office. Steve, a million thanks. My salutes to an airborne ranger extraordinaire, and we'll see you in a week. So hang in there and namaste.